1360 WLBK, DeKalb County's news and information station. Welcome into the DARA radio show presented by the DeKalb Area Rental Association, an organization of rental property owners and managers united to promote safe and quality housing, fair business practices, and the preservation of property rights. Three landlords with us today to discuss current issues affecting rental housing in DeKalb are Jim Mason of Mason Properties and Ombudsman for DARA, Brad Rubik of the College Housing Group and Information Director for DARA, Jerry Wahlstrom, a local realtor and landlord, and McCabe Realty, also a member of the Safe and Quality Housing Task Force. And also with us is the Director of Government Affairs for the Illinois Association of Realtors, Kristen as well. Well, Brad, before we meet our new guest, would you tell us more about the DeKalb Area Rental Association and why it was established, please?
Sure, Terry. Did you know that there are more rental property businesses in DeKalb than any other business? There are landlords that simply rent out one room of their house. There are landlords that rent out hundreds of units. With such a large amount of folks in the business, it made sense to have an organization to develop relationships, to learn from each other, and to have a voice in our community. You know, realtors have a state and local organization. Different trades have their union affiliations. Even city managers have Illinois Municipal League. So even though landlords are in competition with each other, we can work together to become better educated, improve our image, and protect our property rights. You know, it's amazing how fast we've grown and established ourselves as the voice of landlords in DeKalb area. DARA was originally established last fall. We already have over 40 members and a steady stream of new applicants. So our quarterly meetings, where educational speakers come in from different fields that affect our business. Recent speakers include State's Attorney Clay Campbell, past City Manager Bill Nicholas, and representatives of the Illinois Rental Property Owners Association, Paul Arena. We encourage landlords and property managers in the area to join for the many benefits. So go to daranow.com for membership information.
All right, very good. You know, there's a lot of bad jokes about lawyers that we hear all the time, too, and unfortunately, landlords kind of fall in that category as well. The word landlord can have kind of a bad connotation. Tell us how we're changing that.
Well, you're right, and certainly presenting a better image is a good thing. Just like in any business, you have a few unscrupulous landlords out there, but bad landlords should not define us. Many of our local landlords are very respected members of our community. There are many more good landlords than bad. So realtors on hand, they don't experience that ill-conceived image, even though many of them are actually landlords as well.
All right, very good. Well, today we have with us a representative from the Illinois Realtors Association, Kristen, and also a local realtor and task force member and landlord, Jerry Wahlstrom. Both of them, welcome to the show. So glad the guys have you here, and it's very exciting that we're able to talk about this on the radio.
Well, thank you.
Welcome to the airwaves.
Glad to be here.
And Jerry, tell us about your background and why are you involved with this, Jerry?
I've been a realtor here in the area for probably about 35 years now. I've been involved with different rental properties over those years, and I've always thought that there should be an organization like DARA to be started. And here about approximately 8, 9, 10 months ago, why it was started. So I just wanted to take an opportunity to be part of that.
It seems like a natural, doesn't it, that we'd all get together, all the landlords get together and be on the same page when it comes to issues like this.
I think there's a lot of educational benefits that can be derived from that. There's so many landlords in town that can share some expertise with others. There's so many opportunities for educational programs to be presented by experts in various areas, such as code compliance, such as orderly houses, such as orderly activities, such as all the different things that go into landlordship, if that's the right word. But certainly over the next probably few years, all those are going to be addressed, I'm sure.
And Jerry, you're really on both sides of the street here because I see you're also a member of the Safe and Quality Housing Task Force. Now, why did you join that organization? Why is it important that you join that organization?
Again, I was sort of anxious, I guess, to get involved with that probably a little over a year ago now. I think it was back in December of 2010 that the mayor announced that formation. I originally asked, I guess, the mayor at that time if there were any opening spots, and he said, yeah, there were a few. So I was asked to be part of that, and glad to be part of it ever since its beginning.
Okay, and again, you're covering some tough issues there, too. And tell us what are the feelings at the Quality Task Force? What are the overall feelings about how things are progressing so far?
Well, there's about 12 or 13 members on that group, and covers a wide variety of occupations and interests. So I think that was a great idea to get that divergence. The first 7 or 8 or 9 months involved probably educational aspects of the different members. We had meetings in various locations throughout town. We had different study groups that were formed to try to investigate different statistical informations about different aspects of the rental market in DeKalb. So I think that was educational. And now for the last 4 or 5 months, different, more definitive actions have been addressed. So now, in fact, just as of January and February of this year, the task force put together a group after looking at many, many different ideas, kind of narrowed it down to about 7 or 8 recommendations that were put forward. Some of them involve things such as developing different computer or software programs to actually accurately track code issues and police interventions, establishing a punch list of different code enforcement and law enforcement expectations to be put out for landlords. And one of the things that I was really kind of in favor of was having the code department do annual walkarounds, just walk around the cities and especially certain areas where perhaps there might be a little greater number of code violations, and walk around that every year, establishing different neighborhood groups that could be more actively involved with things such as Pride Week or doing things like that would actually involve the owners of properties more than just having always a negative kind of a feeling from the city coming down with negative input. So I think all those things, and there were 7 or 8 of them, and I think they're all going to be considered now at different times by the City Council as we go throughout this year.
All right, very good. You're listening to the DARA radio show here on 1360 WLBK as we talk housing here in the city of DeKalb. And last week we learned about licensing and inspections from Brad and Jim. Tell us more about your thoughts, Jerry, on the proposed licensing and inspections.
Well, licensing and inspections, and I think it's kind of a consensus from the discussions that were held around the task force, would probably be a little bit maybe premature or perhaps maybe not needed at this time in the city. I likened it a little bit to maybe like hanging a picture on a wall with a sledgehammer. You probably don't need to quite go to that extreme at this point in time.
Okay.
There were many discussions in various meetings with the code department at the city when they were asked about different things that were happening in code violations and so on. And it was pretty much agreed that, well, the code department kind of knew where the areas were and the different neighborhoods that needed the most attention. It's pretty evident from looking at certain properties on the outside, what properties might need more attention. So, I think that probably the initial codes, the initial enforcement processes that are in place certainly seem to be sufficient. And I know one of the problems that the city has had over the last few years is a reduction in force. And I think the force in the code department has gone from 7 or 8 people down to maybe 3 code enforcement officers, and one of which I think only works part-time, half-time, on actually maintenance code violations. So there probably would be a pretty good reason for maybe expanding some of those duties within that department, as well as perhaps expanding some of the opportunities for developing more positive aspects, such as the things we had talked about, neighborhood improvement, Pride Weeks, that type of thing, rather than always citing negative things about properties.
Yeah, very interesting. And you're talking about using the technology, but yet you're kind of old school too, with the just visually you can see or go to the places that obviously need to be checked up on.
Brad, we did a little experiment with that back in July of 11. Another member of the board and task force and I did a walk around the Harrison Johns College locust kind of area that's kind of maybe traditionally known to having some properties that might not be kept up quite so well. So we did a walk around. It took a couple of hours. We made notes as we were walking around, and we found things such as garbage containers, rotting wood in windows, weeds in the front yard, bad roof conditions, painting that needed to be redone, old vans sitting in the front, junk sitting up on the porch. So it didn't take a lot. It took a couple of hours, and we didn't have any power or anything to do anything about it.
Right.
But it was just kind of interesting to go around and see what you could find just by taking a little time. And I think that same thing could be done over the next couple of years. I mean, obviously it's a big city, but there's certain areas you probably wouldn't have to go to. But then there are others that probably they know where to go, and within a year's time you probably could cover the entire city and make some corrective actions.
All right, very good. We also have with us today Kristen Jungles, who is the Government Affairs Director for the Illinois Association of Realtors. Kristen, tell us about your role in the state and local level. What exactly do you do? And first of all, welcome, and tell us what you do, please.
Sure. Thanks for having us on the program this morning. The Illinois Association of Realtors has a very active government affairs group in Illinois that includes both lobbyists in Springfield as well as a government affairs directors team, like myself, that work with local realtor associations. Essentially, it is my job to work closely with the DeKalb Area Association of Realtors to promote any state legislation or local ordinance that will have a positive impact on the local real estate community, and to work against any legislation that will have a negative impact on our local markets. So we regularly meet with state legislators and local officials to share our opinions on any upcoming bills or agenda items. And because we are very active, many of our realtor members, like Jerry, are appointed to task force and committees because local officials know that their expertise in the local real estate market is important.
Sure, who better to get it from than the actual source itself?
Absolutely.
Now tell us, what is the Illinois Association of Realtors' position on licensing and inspection in general?
Well, generally speaking, the Illinois Association of Realtors believes that the real estate industry and local governments can, in fact, work together to establish policies and programs that will promote housing opportunities, but then not infringe upon any private property rights. We believe that the owners of the rental property should provide safe and decent housing for the needs of their rental occupants, and in turn, we think that renters should accept the responsibility to simply maintain and care for the property and the safety of its fellow occupants. We would oppose any ordinance that creates an additional hardship for the landlords and will have a negative impact on the local real estate market and our future tenants. We have a really unique situation here in DeKalb. With over 45,000 residents in the city and more than 25,000 of them being from the college, there is a significant portion of the housing market that's dependent upon rental properties. So it's really important to get these ordinances right the first time.
All right, very good. Now, you've met with the DeKalb Area Association of Realtors regarding DeKalb's proposed license and inspection ordinances. Are there specific concerns within DeKalb preliminary draft of the ordinance, and why? Tell us, please.
There are. As you know, the DeKalb Area Association of Realtors is made up of a very active group of realtors, and they represent clients in the area on all types of real estate transactions, both single-family properties and rentals. And our members recognize that the very last thing that needs to happen in the city of DeKalb is to impose larger burdens and additional penalties on their landlord clients and to intrude on their residential rental clients. The DeKalb Area Association of Realtors Board of Directors has, in fact, reviewed the ordinances, and they have a number of concerns. Initially, you look at the fees that are associated with inspection requirements and vacant property registration. You look at the requirement that if a landlord in a multifamily residential unit has a code violation in just one of those units, he or she would not be able to enter into a rental agreement in any of the remaining units until the code violation has been created. So this is going to create an additional hardship for the landlords. Additionally, the proposed time frame to correct any code violations is completely unrealistic, and the inspection requirement is just absurd. So depending on the length of the program, I could probably go on with a number of those issues.
Well, you've used some strong languages already, but I mean, this is obviously shortcomings in the proposals in here.
Absolutely, there are.
All right, very good. And Jim Mason with us as always. Jim, you've been discussing some of the specific requirements of this draft and how extensive and intrusive they are. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit, Jim, please.
Well, if you take a look at the proposed license inspection ordinance that we've seen published, not published, but written this time, there are draconian issues, of which Kristen just alluded to. The interesting thing about the license and inspection thing, if it were to come to pass, you'd need a thing called inspectors. People would be paid to go look into other people's property, whether it's a single-family home or multifamily use. The interesting thing about that is that tenants and landlords are inspectors. Tenants live in the property, know what the issues are. So one would say, why would you need an inspector by the city to go do the job of the public? The way the ordinance was written originally that I've seen, that I have in my hand here, there was really two proposals. One proposal was the present way we do things. A voluntary invitation by the city to come inspect by the tenant landlord, or the city staff sees things from the street. Now that makes sense, and that's what we're doing now. The other proposal is 20% of the city would be inspected every year, a staff would be put in place, and it would be a monumental task to inspect 20% of the units every year. But the landlord would have to pay every year, even though he wasn't inspected. In Glendale Heights, they pay $300 for an inspection. So one could say you could pay $300 a year for 4 years, be inspected on the 5th year, and what would happen? The last thing is, how and why does the city get the right to come and inspect these properties? Well, 50 years ago, I think the Warrant Court came up with health and safety entrance. Health and safety is a Trojan horse. The municipalities and governments can come and inspect the people that pay the taxes. And so if you think about health and safety, if you're inspecting once every 60 months, if you get your teeth fixed once every 60 months, your teeth will rot and everything will change between the inspection periods. So we feel that if this was passed, it'd be so draconian that it would be a financial burden on the landlords, and it really wouldn't accomplish the mission.
Or can you explain that fancy word you used for us as novice, as layman? What does that mean exactly?
Which word?
The draconian?
Draconian means drastic.
Oh, so a little extreme. Okay, and
It's
then
extreme.
Jim and Kristen, what are your feelings on this? Expand on that if you would.
Well, the DeKalb Realtors agree with Jim that the fee structure is definitely excessive. So for this, as well as what wasn't talked about, is the burden that it's going to present to the city of DeKalb. I mean, with the number of rental units that are in DeKalb, if all of those, 20% of those properties needed to be inspected, there's going to be a huge overhead cost for the city. So where is that cost going to go? It's going to be passed right down to the landlords. So once it's passed down to the landlords, it'll start to price people out of the rental market.
Kind of that trickle-down approach there. Jerry, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I guess I sort of agree that the fees that were originally proposed in here were rather high, and as I look through the different inspection ideas, the one as an example for the annual inspection had different definitions in it. One of which was something called a warning condition. This is a condition that really isn't quite as severe as an extremely hazardous condition, but it's a condition nonetheless. So let's say that you're an owner of a building and the inspector comes through and he finds such things that are listed here: a tear in a screen less than a half an inch, a loose doorknob, a non-structural crack in a wall,
I have all those things in my home.
I was just thinking of my house, and I'm thinking, now, let's see, which house doesn't have these? A drip, and here's another one for you, a dripping faucet. So these are all items that are actually listed in the inspection ordinance that, even though they're listed as warning issues, these are issues that could be that an inspector could find that pop up, and a warning is issued. Now, they don't have to be repaired quite as quickly. They have a 6-month time period to be repaired. However, they still do have to be repaired, and they're still listed as possible inspection findings. So, I mean, if you just carry that to extremes, you can see what could happen. Not that it would,
right,
by any means, but certainly that it could. So these are some of the issues that have to be addressed. And I do think that the idea of that Jim had mentioned about tenants, owners, neighbors specifically, you can just imagine if you're living in a house and that is kept beautifully, and the house next door to you happens to be really kept in a really downtrodden, miserable-looking condition, I would think you'd call. You'd maybe talk to the owner and say, hey, why don't you cut those weeds? Why don't you get rid of that junk car? Why don't you fix that hanging door? Or why don't you paint the house? It really looks terrible. 90% of it's chipping. So you might get no results from that owner. So certainly then the next step would be for you to become the inspector and call the city, and then of course the legal aspects would take place. So certainly all those other avenues I think are available. I know that when we one of the first things we did on that task force, and I did personally, because I really didn't have a good knowledge of this, is I went through and read every ordinance. Now the one problem with the ordinances are, try to read them and try not to fall asleep before you get to the end.
Well, they're written at legalese, right?
They're also hidden. Well, I shouldn't say hidden, but someone asked me in the office the other day, how many people can live again in a dwelling unit? Because there are ordinances that deal with everything. One of which is how many people can live in a dwelling unit, unrelated people. And I said, well, I think I know the answer, but I'll tell you. But let me look it up. Well, 20 minutes later, I gave up and said, I can't find it, but I'll just tell you what I know. So I think one of the issues that the city should address is making the requirements of both landlord and tenant much more easily accessible. And by that, probably it could be published, but it also could be made accessible on the website. Almost everybody goes on the internet. They look for everything first, whether they're looking to buy a house, buy a car, whatever it happens to be. I think almost everybody now goes to the web first or goes to the internet. So when I tried to go, you can navigate around the website, and certainly all the information is there. It's just sort of spread out, and you probably have to spend hours and hours trying to research it before you can get to the right answer. So there's all those different ideas that come into play, but certainly from the standpoint of detailed, internal, inside, hey, I'm coming into your unit kind of inspections, they're probably not needed quite yet.
All right, very good. And Jim, when we talk about property owners losing some of their rights, it could happen for the tenants as well, huh?
Well, absolutely. Once the city gets the power, it takes the power through this process, landlords and property owners basically become second fiddle, because when the city becomes judge and executioner on these situations, sad things can happen, and the liberty of the property owner is depleted, because the power of the city can come in and basically tell you how to run your operation, how you should live, and what have you. So that's the reason we think this is not a good deal. Down in Bolingbrook and Granite City, they presently have strong license and inspection, and the property owners' values of their property is going down, because the banks and investors see this type of activity is deleterious. Now, when a license is revoked, your mortgage will be in default. Every mortgage has this in it. You have to have the price and registration, licensing, and any other documents that are withdrawn can force a default. So this is really important, and most city managers or whatever, I don't think they take that into consideration.
All right, very good. And Kristen, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, we have seen an increase in residential rentals in our real estate market now. And what's important to note is that the landlords in DeKalb do provide a housing alternative for DeKalb residents. So if they do impose any other fees, as Jim had just talked about, the city of DeKalb is going to pass those fees down to the landlords. The landlords, in turn, are going to pass them on to the tenants. As soon as they're priced out of this market, renters are going to look elsewhere for DeKalb housing options. And likewise, when we start to see a burden on landlords, they are going to tell our realtor members that they do not want to invest in the DeKalb community. And that is a side effect that they don't want to see in the city of DeKalb.
Yeah, that snowball effect happening there.
Yes.
All right, very good. And, of course, let's talk tax dollars, because that's when people really pay attention. Now, a portion of the local taxpayer dollars go towards paying the city manager and also pays for his membership in the Illinois Municipal League. So a portion of your tax dollars goes towards these entities that want to take away some of your rights as a property owners. I want you to explain that, Jim, what we're talking about there.
Well, every time you spend money on license and inspection or anything like that, it does make a big impact on the cost of operation. Impact fees are something that are really interesting here. Ever since if you want to talk about regulations, ever since impact fees were brought into the city of DeKalb 5 or 6 years ago to build a house or do anything like this, they were so high that the profit in that building that house was diminished by the amount of the impact fees, i.e. there's no profit to build a house because the impact fees were higher than the profit to build a house. So this regulation, it just burdens the possibility of operating, whether it's impact fees, license and inspection, or anything else.
All right, very good. Now, Brad, we just have about 5 minutes left. What do we want to get to here? We have a couple issues we wanted to touch upon.
That's a good point. I think we made it really clear about the extra time and expense and the intrusion of the tenants, and 55% of the housing in DeKalb is rental housing. So you're talking a huge situation here. We talked briefly. We had a gentleman come to our last meeting talk about the Rockford Apartment Association. Briefly, he said in a survey with tenants in the area, tenants more than anything wanted to be treated the same as homeowners. This particular ordinance doesn't do that. So these intrusions that they encounter, the potential pass-through fees, all of these things are a burden to them. So if we want to skip over to that and get down to this impact study a little bit, we really feel like this is such a major issue that we need to address the impact, the overall impact before something so drastic changes, and then we find out after the fact. I mean, this could be a major, major issue. So we all feel the impact study needs to be done previous to find out and or enforce the ordinance that are in place now. Let's take a few steps before we go this extreme situation.
Impact study. That's a very good question. The City Council and NIU are getting ready to do a $120,000 study on housing in DeKalb. I think before the university and the city does that, they should really do an impact study on what license and inspection would do to the landlords and tenants of this town before you worry about that. Developers that come into our community, they're going to do their own impact studies, due diligence, if you will. That's their responsibility if they want to come to our community. But what we have to do is take care of the present housing stock that we have in place. So I really think that we maybe want to think about impact study on the people that are here, not what is not here yet.
All right, very good. And Kristen, you've experienced with license and inspections. What kind of effects have you seen on these policies? What can we anticipate these policies? What kind of effect might they have?
Well, DeKalb is not the first community that's looking at adopting these types of restrictions, and they're certainly not going to be the last. But what we find in most communities is that city officials are willing to work with the realtors and the landlords to draft an ordinance that accomplish both the goals of the city as well as not making sure that it doesn't have a negative impact on the real estate market. We've recognized that education here is key. So the Illinois Association of Realtors has actually developed a practical guide for landlords in Illinois. So it's an advocacy piece. It provides an overview of the main laws and regulations in residential rental property management. And we find that when our local associations, such as the DeKalb Area Realtors, are able to open that dialogue early with city staff, what the result is a more favorable ordinance. So, because I think at this point that if city officials in DeKalb understood the impact to these proposed ordinances, they would think twice about adopting them.
Okay, so this sounds like a very practical guide that people can a great place to start if they want to learn more about what's going on here.
It would be a good jumping off point for sure.
Okay, very good. And Jerry, again, the Housing Task Force will continue to work diligently at this and try to come to a logical conclusion here with the two parties?
As I mentioned, the task force has been operational now since December of 10, and there were some comments made at the last meeting that perhaps we're reaching the end of its I don't want to say usefulness, but perhaps the end of its investigative abilities. But I really would hope that perhaps, yes, it would continue for at least the next several months or maybe for the remainder of the year to certainly investigate some of the other things and discuss and have open dialogue about some of the other issues and continue with the discussions about the inspection issue, continue about the vacant property registration issue, continue about the landlord-tenant handbook revised issue. Again, that landlord-tenant handbook was created several years ago, maybe 11 years ago, and it probably needs to be revised and taken into consideration.
Okay. And Jim, one last thing before we close up?
One thing about the license and inspection is such a monumental task. I've done a whole bunch of pro formas on this, and you could never raise enough money to inspect 4 or 5, 10,000 homes. It should be astronomical. So we think that the present system in place, and we'd like to stay where we're at. Go ahead.
Oh, very good. And Brad, again, for people who want to get more information about you guys, want to learn more about the DARA group, they can go to daranow.com, right? And they get all the information they need?
That's right. We're expanding the website all the time. We've added some new buttons. We try to include some of the access to the ordinances and other things that are currently pending, the proposed ordinances and such. So you can go on daranow.com at any point in time. It's user-friendly, and take a look at some of these issues and learn more for yourself, because, as mentioned, it affects over half the people in this community. I mean, this is not a small deal.
Very good.